Well, hello and welcome to today's episode of the Power of Your Mind podcast. You're listening to episode number 132. I'm Victoria Gallagher, Law of Attraction hypnotist and number one best-selling author of Practical Law of Attraction: Align Yourself with the Manifesting Conditions and Successfully Attract Your Desires. I'm also the founder of HipTalk.com and HypnoCloud apps, which gives you access to over 500 hypnosis recordings right in the palm of your hand. So be sure to download that app from the app stores. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Melanie Weller. Melanie Weller is the leading expert in opening the door to health performance and innovation through the vagus nerve, the bridge between our narratives and our physical experience. A medical visionary and storyteller of the human body, Melanie weaves science and wisdom together to create transformation for her clients that feels like magic. Melanie is a physical therapist, board certified orthopedic clinical specialist, certified athletic trainer, and certified exercise expert for aging adults. And today, Melanie is going to be sharing some of her insights on the vagus nerve and our internal cosmology. So welcome to the show, Melanie.
Thank you so much for having me, Victoria.
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. And, we're hearing a lot more lately, it seems, about this vagus nerve. So I want to just jump right in. And for our audience who's never even heard, what isn't Vegas like a city
right,
in
Nevada?
Nevada?
Nevada, right. Yeah, it's
Go ahead.
It's so exciting for me it's so exciting to see so much more of it in the media, because I've been feeling like I've been screaming vagus nerve into the wind for years. So it's very exciting that things are catching up and that it's getting so much more press. Your vagus nerve is the biggest component of your parasympathetic nervous system. So it counters your fight and flight responses.
Oh.
And most of us are really familiar with our vagus nerves when they aren't working well, because that's when we go to do something that makes us a little uncomfortable. Like, for example, public speaking would be a good example of this reaction. But when we get nervous and we get a lump in our throats and our palms sweat and our heart starts to race and our digestion shifts, those are all vagus nerve mediated functions. And we get those responses because our vagus nerve has been dialed down and our fight and flight responses have been dialed up.
Got it. So it's sort of the opposite. It gives us the opposite feeling when it's working well, it gives us the opposite feeling of when we're in our fight or flight mode.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And from a motor standpoint, it innervates your vocal cords, your heart, and your digestive system muscles. It is involved in bile and digestive enzyme secretion as well. It sends more information up to your brain than it sends down to your body. In the research, they found that vagus nerve stimulation remaps your brain at the highest levels. Vagus nerve stimulation also reverses the mitochondrial defects that go with heart disease. And so your vagus nerve isn't directly in the mitochondria in your cells, but it causes a cascade of events when it's functioning well that reverses heart disease.
Right.
How well your vagus nerve functions in general has predictive value for how long people with pancreatic cancer will live. So it holds some amount of value for for immunity and longevity. And in women with complete spinal cord injuries, they can achieve orgasm with vagus nerve stimulation at the cervix, because the vagus nerve innervates the cervix and the vagus nerve is outside of their spinal cord. And sexual arousal and pleasure in general is a parasympathetic response. So your vagus nerve is your grace under pressure, it's your pleasure response, and it's your it's maybe more commonly talked about as your rest and digest as well. But, there are many, many aspects to it. It even, there are two pathways to the vagus nerve, and what I've talked about so far is really the front part of it. That's more, they call it the ventral pathway. That's more towards the front of the body. There's a dorsal pathway towards the back of the body that drives our freeze responses. And so there are many, many layers to the vagus nerve and what it does. But overwhelmingly, the research shows us that when the vagus nerve is functioning better, our health is better, not just our physical health, but our mental health too. And what I've discovered over the years is that your vagus nerve is really the bridge between your story and your body. Mm-hmm. When your story is trauma and stress, then your vagus nerve gets dialed down. When your story is gratitude and pleasure, then your vagus nerve gets dialed up.
Wow. I mean, first of all, I just have to say, what an important nerve to have. That, I mean, it seems like it really runs so much that's so important in our lives. Like, why have we not been hearing more about this until only recently? That's one question. And then the other is, in a way, it was like interesting how you said how it connects your story, what you're thinking about, to your response, what is happening in your body as a result of what you're thinking about. So much of this, to me, being the law of attraction girl, it really feels like therein lies one of the reasons why law of attraction works, is because it's like what you're telling yourself. There's an actual physical aspect to that. So can first speak to, if you can, like, why has it taken so long for this to become, it's not even mainstream yet. Like, most people have not even really heard of this.
Yeah.
But even just to get to this point, where it's like people are just starting to get some awareness out of it. And then my second question.
Yeah, I don't have a really good answer for why it's taken so long. I think that it's, I think certainly it's probably come about with the rise in anxiety and depression and mental health issues, because it is that integral part of the parasympathetic nervous system, that there was this drive to figure out how to get people out of anxiety. Mm-hmm. And this is all very hypothetical, but that would be because of the advent of a lot of pharmaceutical drugs for anxiety and depression, or I think, my recollection is a lot of that really amplified through like the 90s and 2000s, that it would be natural for that to coincide with trying to learn more about the vagus nerve. I think from an energetic standpoint that I think it's really, nobody's asked me this question before, so I think this is, but the answer that I would maybe prefer to give for this is that, because I think your vagus nerve really holds your internal cosmology, and that with the rise in the interest of astrology that's happened mm-hmm. over the last mm-hmm. 20 years or so, how astrology's really gone mainstream, I think it makes a lot of sense that these structures that hold our internal cosmology would also get more attention. Mm-hmm. And, as a physical therapist, I've worked with people on their alignment for many, many years. And we think way too small about alignment. When we use law of attraction and we say, oh, the stars lined up for me, they literally did. Like, there is actually I believe, a physical cosmology to that's happened. And in the way that stars and planets are all named, and naming, the research behind naming is really powerful, mm-hmm. and that these archetypes all have these really powerful stories that go with them. Those stories are part of that. We're all literally made of stardust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that stardust has a story.
Interesting. So, how does the vagus nerve bridge our stories and our bodies?
The vagus nerve, well, I'll start with the structural piece of that and then build into the story, a little bit more specifics of the story. So the vagus nerve gets compressed, or it can get mechanically compressed, where we have horizontal structures in our body. So for example, we know that trauma always affects the voice and the breath, and our vocal cords and diaphragm are horizontal muscles in our bodies.
Okay.
And our pelvic floors are horizontal. And so we have this whole horizontal system. And for me, there's 6 major compression points that I talk about. And the universe is completely rotational. The math of the universe, like the earth spins, the solar system spins, and nobody experiences stress or trauma and has really great arm swing when they walk. We all lock up.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, in the diaphragm, we all have more muscle mass on the right side of our diaphragm than we do on the left. It's part of our inherent asymmetry. But when we lock down on the right, which is the much more common dysfunction in a lot of people, because most of us are right-handed as well, we'll end up being more dominant on the right side, a little more locked down. But the earth below us and the solar system above us spin the opposite direction.
Interesting.
So
Wow.
we are literally out of flow and out of alignment on this cosmic scale. And my background is in treating complicated chronic pain patients and others that haven't had success elsewhere. So there are certainly basic exercises that people will respond to without always maybe consciously needing to address this cosmic component. But I've spent so much time with people that haven't gotten results elsewhere that I know that the way this rotation lives in the body has real consequences, because when I address it with clients, they get better physical alignment and better physical results. And they also start magnetizing more amazing things in their lives because they're in flow on a bigger scale.
Right. So what causes a person to like realize it's time to come and see somebody like you? Like what is it that happens that they say, "Whoa, my vagus nerve is out of whack."
Right. Well, sure. As a physical therapist, most people would just come to me for pain. That
Right.
my reputation locally is that I'm the body whisperer, and I've been working really hard
I
over
love
the
that, the
years.
body whisperer. Yes.
I've been working really hard over the years to get people to come to me before that happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to really bring this awareness so that my dream is to put myself out of business in illness care and to really just do wellness. I see a wide range of situations. I see a lot of orthopedic problems, back pain, joint pain. I see, and I work with people online and in person for this. And in a minute, I'll
So
tell
you
you.
can do this. Yeah. So you can do this.
Yeah,
online.
I'll tell you. Yes, and I'll explain a little bit more about the cosmology because that'll start to make it make a lot more sense.
Okay.
And but I have right now I have an autistic teenager that's doing amazing. He said his first words the other day. He said, "Hi, Mom," which was just like I cried all morning.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
You know,
So he came to you unable
to. Yeah, he had never said anything.
Oh, and how old is he?
17.
Oh my goodness. For 17 years he never
Yeah.
uttered a word until
Yeah.
you did your magic
Yeah,
on
I've been
him.
working with him for a couple months, but yeah, he had never said anything before that.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And
That's astounding.
and I work with leaders, and it's incredibly humbling, like to be part of something like it leaves me speechless. Like I don't know, like it's but it's also what's so exciting. Like I have just had, it's such a privilege to be able to offer transformations in this way. And and I also work with leaders that are in entrepreneurs that are looking to unblock their roads to abundance and get out of their old stories and into a new one. And story lives very prescriptively in the body. And this is really what ancient traditions have to offer us. So mythology, among many things, was a mode of communicating scientific information. So, for example, in the ancient Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris are the numbers of the Earth's precessional cycle. And there are other major myths from other cultures that have the same numbers in them. So the story was a way that they used to communicate the science. We just talk about science very differently now. In Western astrology, the Aries rules the head, and the ventricles in your brain that make cerebral spinal fluid look just like the ram's horns for Aries.
Interesting.
And the way your hyoid bone sits on top of your larynx looks just like the symbol for Taurus, and Taurus rules the throat. And the aortic arch is the same shape as the symbol for Leo, and Leo rules the heart. And it works this way the whole way through the body. So we can, one, use the story as a way to really dig into the spiritual underpinnings of our physical dysfunction. And as a stress management expert, we know, like we know that stress is 75 to 90% of all illness and disease, but we don't really dig into what that stress is very much, or we'll talk about it technically in terms of vagus nerve function, but we are really wired for story. And story is much more transformative than technical talk for most people.
Right. So, I mean, can you give us an example of, you know, what you mean about that story? Like how?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So one of the most common, maybe the most common place where I see the vagus nerve compressed is at the base of the skull. And where your vagus nerve exits the base of the skull is 23.5 degrees from the center of where your spinal cord exits. And the earth is at a 23.5 degree tilt. So there's just this cosmology to, this angle, I call them critical angles. And so there are multiple critical angles in the body that I found that if these angles are not right, you are less likely to feel well. But in the way that Aries rules the head and Taurus rules the throat, when your heroics and your desires are at odds with each other, it impairs your vision. So when you're being the hero in someone else's story at the expense of your own, or you're not showing up as the type of hero that that your calling, is to show up, or if you're satisfying everybody else's desires except your own, that will very often manifest as head and neck tension.
Okay.
And so I've also turned this
Say that again, because I've been having a lot of
a lot of head and neck.
A lot of neck tension lately.
Yeah. Well, so like women are really culturally conditioned for this, because we're conditioned to be the hero in our partner's story and in our children's stories. And we often at the expense of our own. And, and we're trained to satisfy everybody else's desires before we satisfy our own. That's a very, certainly things are changing, but, that's how I was raised overwhelmingly. And really when, ultimately your heroics and your desires should not be interdependent on each other. Like they shouldn't be, like one shouldn't have to function at the expense of the other. That they're each able to function independently. How I deal a lot with this through the physical body and through my online sessions is in the way that I've created a form of energy medicine out of this. So we literally have a set of ram's horns, like the ram, that Aries ram lives in our head. And if its horns are wonky, then, then we are not energetically able to align with our highest potential in terms of our leadership and our heroics and our vision. And when that, when we're not speaking from our authentic voice, then we're often not speaking our desires, or it can be more difficult to connect with your desires or to command your desires into being. The Egyptian myth of the Apis Osiris bull describes laryngeal anatomy in quite a bit of detail. And so I'll sometimes walk people through this, and I'll have them first say their name. Like I would say, I am Melanie, or like they say it just as they normally would. And I'll walk them through the visualization of the bull. And I'm like, okay, now I want you to speak from this bull, which was, for the Egyptians, was the physical embodiment of their creation god, and say, and then say your name from that space.
Oh, wow. So you literally have them embody that archetype.
Yes. And so I've taught this to high school students for a thespian exercise, which is really fun in terms of embodying a character.
Uh-huh.
And I've trained some hypnotherapists to use this technique also in their practice, or taught them my process, so then they can take people through visualizing their bull. And what the feedback I've received is that they are able to use it as a way to help people work through their trauma without re-traumatizing them.
Got it. So what are the steps? How would you teach a hypnotherapist how to go through that? Is that something that's easy enough to explain?
Well, I'm not a hypnotherapist, so I don't I do a little more teaching my principles and how I've used it, and then let them adapt it for their particular style of practice. But I teach a lot about how story lives in the body. So like I said, the ventricles of the brain are like the ram's horns for Aries. Your cerebellum and your brainstem together look like the Hindu deity Ganesh. And the biblical story of the Temple of the Ark of the Covenant describes pretty much the entirety of your cranial anatomy in significant detail. And so so I teach them how to do an energetic assessment to see which story needs to be addressed.
Okay.
Because it's not always that it's just it's like every head issue is not an Aries issue, but that's just an easy, for like in this format, that's an easy way to give an example of it. But there's lots of nuance to that. And these stories and the energy, they just get distorted and energetically can be brought back into alignment, but they can also be brought back into alignment through guided imagery. I've worked with artists, it can be brought back into alignment through art exercises as well. And so there are many, many pathways to doing this. What I find is that this work makes other people's work better. Having this awareness and having this understanding tends to amplify other clinicians' practices.
Right.
And that because this is a technique that I developed, I'm really good at it. But I don't really want people to mimic what I'm doing, because your superpower is different than my superpower. So what I really want you to do is figure out how to integrate it with your superpower, so that rather than mimicking my protocols, so that because that's where you're going to have the most impact on your clients.
Right. That makes sense. Definitely. So can you talk to us just a little bit more about the internal cosmology that determines our reality? How does that?
Sure.
How does that
work? Well, so like in the way, I'll say, like, for example, Jupiter rules the pelvis, and Jupiter's sign is Sagittarius, which is a sign of the bow and arrow, sign of the archer. And your pelvis looks is archetypally very much like a crossbow, and your spine like an arrow. And if that bow and arrow relationship is askew, you often have a hard time targeting your blessings. And so it can be difficult to manifest. We create from our pelvises. Scorpio rules the reproductive system, and a woman's reproductive system looks very much like a scorpion. and where the vagina is the tail, the uterus is the body, and the ovaries would be the claws.
Mm.
And
I'll never think of that the same again.
And whether you're making love or babies or business or art, that all comes from the second chakra. And our archetypal blessing giver, Jupiter, rules the pelvis that holds those creation energies. And so our body, this is just the way the cosmos lives in our bodies. And even down at there are structures within the cells that are the same shape as the constellations as well. And solar and stellar rotation movements live in the body. And so when we're looking to create, or when we're struggling to create with what we desire, we have blockages to that flow. So those horizontal structures like your pelvic floor, your diaphragm, your vocal cords, base of your skull, they clamp off the flow of all things vertical. And I contextualize a lot of this through the vagus nerve because that's been my focus. And from a PT standpoint, there are many musculoskeletal benefits to using the vagus nerve. But really, when flow is blocked, you've not just blocked your vagus nerve flow, you've blocked the flow of all of your nerves and your arteries and your veins and your lymphatics that go vertically. And this concept is very consistent with the Chinese philosophy of qi moving through the body.
Wow, this really makes it, it really is coming together. It's really making a lot of sense. So how would a person who feels like, they've got one of these areas in their life blocked, how would they work with the vagus nerve to stimulate it, to get themselves back into,
Sure.
alignment?
I can give a couple examples here, but at my website, if you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, my website is melanieweller.com. And if you put in your email address, it will send you a free vagus nerve decompression course and take you through a full body head to toe assessment and how to treat each of those areas.
That's wonderful. Thanks for that. So they can get a free assessment at your website, Melanie.
Yeah, it'll take them. It's a video of me walking through the assessment and exercise process. So it is very easy to, I've put that out there. I would love these exercises just to be basic public health, like brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
Just,
that's great.
And when one of my favorite exercises is to decompress the vagus nerve at the heart, and it tends to get stuck, I would say, more towards the backside of the heart, and that shows up physically where people do not expand their ribs on the backside of their body when they inhale. They will have all of their breathing on the front side, and this is very common in anxiety. And
yeah, you actually notice when people have anxiety, you do notice you can actually see their breathing is definitely more shallow, it's toward the front.
Yes, it's towards the front and it's towards the top usually. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're not getting the breath very deep. And so what I do with the exercises is I have people, basically wrap themselves up like a spiral. And this isn't hard. Like if people are following along with this while they're listening, do not do it if you're driving or operating kitchen tools or anything that's, heavy machinery or anything like that. Make sure you're in a still, quiet, safe, non-distracted space.
Yeah.
But you cross your left ankle in front of your right and just gently press your ankles together. You don't have to push hard. And if you have any pain, left in front or right, and if you have any pain or limitations, the beautiful thing about the brain is that you can imagine doing it, and the same parts of your brain activate as if you're actually doing it.
So you can just imagine yourself doing it,
You
and you
really
don't
could just
actually have
imagine
to do it.
yourself. The research shows that if you imagine yourself doing bicep curls, you get stronger in your biceps. Like it
Ooh.
really works to that level.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I haven't actually tried it in actuality. I'm gonna give that a try.
Yeah,
Use a little toning there.
absolutely. Yeah. So, and then to take your right hand and put it on your left shoulder so that your elbow's pointing forward.
Okay.
And take your left hand and put it comfortably in the small of your back. None of this should be painful or causing anyone to contort themselves. You know, absolutely make
Take that around
left
and
hand in the
okay.
small of your back. Like, so the back of your
Okay.
hand is against the small of your back, but just really
Gotcha.
comfortably there. Just
Okay.
rest it.
Okay.
Okay. And then I'm going to explain the breath pattern next. So I want you to inhale for a count of 5 into the back side of your heart. So you're expanding your ribs on the back side. Going to hold for a count of 8 and then exhale like you're blowing up a balloon or blowing out a candle for a count of 13 or as long as you can. And so in the clinic, I'll often just have people do 3 or 5 breaths of this because that's enough to get usually an initial change.
Mm-hmm.
And then I often tell a story with it because my favorite quote is from a tribe in the Andes Mountains. And they say that your future is behind you, propelling you forward. And your past is in front of you, waiting for you to make peace with it and clear your way. And so to really breathe in, when you do that inhale into the backside of your heart, that your future has your back.
Ooh, yeah.
You know, that you're supported, and our hearts really, you know, we can plan the who, what, when, where, and why of many things, but the universe really brings us the how.
It does. Absolutely.
And that attraction point to me is very much with the heart and bringing it through the heart from the backside and having that space on the backside of your heart for everything to move, for that energy to come through.
And so they would do this positioning and the breath. They would do about
Breathing.
5 times. They're breathing about 5
Yes. For people that have a more acute situation, I'll often have them do 3 to 5 sets of 5 breaths. You know, but it really, very often I find, you know, and sometimes like I'll start with this breathing pattern after I've done my assessment on someone just to see where they're restricted. I'll have them do a few breaths and I'll find that they've had their rotation all locked up, and I'll have them do a few breaths and all of their range of motion changes. And they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And they can then really connect with how powerful it is and how much power they have to really change it. They don't always have to come in and see me.
Right. So a lot of this can be done on their own, or they can do this online with you, or
absolutely. Yeah, it's very right. I think we often make healing way too hard.
Mm-hmm.
And our rotational motion is a very good measurement of how our mental health is living in the body. I've seen enough suicide ideation now that I know exactly when to ask people when they haven't told me because of because of their range of motion measurements.
Interesting. Wow.
Because
so you can assess whether somebody is thinking about that based on
I've been right so far. Yeah. I mean, I've seen it so many times that like I know this is a thing, and I'm really I've been looking for, like, I really want to collaborate with some research people. I'm such the artist in this that I need someone to kind of structure the research around it. But I know exactly how to take the measurements. And when somebody comes to me and I find that their upper neck rotation is severely locked up, that their shoulder rotation is limited, that their trunk rotation is limited, that really, and even that like their rotation in their shin bone and their tibia will be limited. When I see all of these rotational limitations, and when they're really severe, like when they have a minimal amount of range of motion, and I really look at uncompensated range of motion. So these people aren't always obviously having difficulty moving out in town. But when I really take away the ability for them to compensate for the movement, that's when it's really obvious. And one of my greatest success stories, his testimonials on my YouTube channel, but he came to me, he had an acute onset of hallucinations and was really suicidal because he was living in a nightmare and hadn't been able to find anyone who would take him or help him. And it was and we had a mutual contact. He ended up in my office, and all I knew was that our mutual contact, she texted me and said, "Oh, you really, do you have time to see him? I really, and I want to pay for it." And that's all I knew. I thought it was probably some orthopedic situation. And I knew when he walked in that I couldn't turn him away because he was in such a difficult place. So I thought, well, I'll decompress his vagus nerve and get him set up with a psychiatrist and, like people that where I knew he would get help. And at the end of our hour, his hallucinations were 90% gone.
Oh my God. Wow.
And he texted me later that night, and said, "Melanie, you saved my life, and not in the cute kind of way, because I was really like, this was the night I was going to kill myself if what you did didn't help me." And it was just such a profound, I had no idea I could do that I could influence that. That was not, I hadn't knowingly treated that condition before in anybody. And the other piece that it really taught me was to bring all of myself to the table and really show up, because I did my very technical vagus nerve decompression process, but I also showed up with all of my intuitive skills and all of my energy skills. And I didn't separate, I did not hold back. I showed up entirely for him. And it made, and it changed his life, it saved his life, and that's, medically practitioners are so, are very trained to hold, to stay in their lanes and to separate personal and home life, or if you're intuitive, I denied my intuition for years, and until it got to the point that, when I was speaking in metaphor to patients, that they would tell me things like, "Melanie, you just described my grandmother in the outfit we buried her in." And I didn't know that I was, connecting in that way with, that I was stepping into more of a mediumship space with it. But, and where I would, I had, my own midlife crisis came in the throes of trying to reconcile all of this. And, that I had been, I have all of these letters after my name, and I had worked really hard for those, but I was really functioning much more like a high priestess for people than I was like a physical therapist, and I was using both, and those skills don't have to necessarily be separate, but we tend to, I know lots of very intuitive medical professionals that will not tell anyone about their perceptions. I know surgeons that always get all of the cancer in their clients because they use spirit to support them, but they would never tell their colleagues about that. But we all have these amazing skills, and and we can bring our technical skills and our intuitive skills together, and when we do, it's just like magic.
It really is, and that's such a powerful story and such a powerful lesson for us all, to be able to really trust that intuition and listen to it and use it. I can relate to that just in my own sessions with clients. Words come out of my mouth that I've never used before. I've never used these phrases. I have no idea why I'm saying what I'm saying, but it just comes out, and then it turns out to be the exact message that they needed to hear. And it also really makes a lot of sense. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is the unexplainable. The things that you get access to this information. And I will imagine that a part of why we're talking about that, the intuition probably is very much impacted by having opened or closed vagus nerve.
Absolutely. I taught with a medium at the Maine Yoga Festival a couple years ago. We did yoga telepathy, excuse me, yoga telepathy and the vagus nerve. And we used the vagus nerve exercises as a warm up to the telepathy exercise for the group. And it was like, it blew my mind how well it worked. That it's,
Yeah.
that the others, like some of the things people had drawn across, we had the room divided in half, and they each practiced being senders and receivers. And it was just amazing how incredibly accurate many of the drawings were. And they were all reflective at some level of that, but it was super, super fun to do that. And I absolutely believe that our intuition comes through our vagus nerves. For me, the vagus nerve archetypally is like the mycelium network of the body. And the mycelium network of the earth connects all the trees and plants together. It's the pathway through which they send warning signals and shunt nutrients and absorb water. And our vagus nerves have some similar functions to that. I also think that the vagus nerve is our archetypal Laniakea supercluster. And our Milky Way galaxy is one little teeny tiny dot of the Laniakea supercluster. And so I think that in terms of where we are, fractals, the microcosm of the macrocosm, that our vagus nerves are really that big galactic neural, multi-galactic neural network.
Wow. Well, this has been very informative, very insightful, and very interesting. All of the I words.
Thank you, Victoria. It's been so much fun to share this with you and your listeners.
Yes, definitely. And I hope that this inspires our listeners of Power of Your Mind podcast to look up melanieweller.com and, get that list or get the free vagus nerve decompression class and workbook that is going to help you to point toward any issues that maybe you've been having, and help you learn more about this really important topic. I had no idea until today really just how deep this goes and how important it really is, and how connected it really is to pretty much every aspect of our lives. Physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And so it's really important. I'm really glad that I got a chance to discuss this with you and talk to you. And any last tips for our viewers, our listeners?
I'm just going to reiterate that concept that your future has your back.
Your future has your back. It's beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being on the show and for inspiring our listeners with your insight and knowledge and information. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Victoria. This has been great.